Welcome back. We're discussing global efforts to put an end to extreme poverty and asking how soon this goal might be achievable or if it is indeed possible. Joining me is Hernando de Soto, a noted Peruvian economist and president of the Institute for Liberty and Democracy in Lima, from where he joins us today. And Philippe Diaz, director of the new documentary, The End of Poverty. He joins us from Grenoble in France, and we're going to get back to our discussion with another clip from that documentary, The End of Poverty, where the discussion takes place about the manipulation of land by powerful interests.
So at some point, we economic hitmen go back in and we say, you can't pay your debts. You owe us a pound of flesh. You owe us a big favor. So sell your oil real cheap to our oil companies, or vote with us on the next critical United Nations vote, or send troops in support of ours to someplace in the world.
If looking at that situation where John Perkins describes how powerful interests and countries can go in and create huge debt in developing nations and then hold them at their mercy, basically, how can that cycle be broken?
Well, it can be broken unless we change our policies vis-à-vis the resources of the South. Today we are in a very extremely dramatic situation where we are consuming 30% more than what the planet can regenerate. So if we are in this situation, it means that for us in the countries of the North to maintain this great lifestyle, this level of waste, this level of consumption, we'll have to plunge more and more people below the poverty line every year in the countries of the South, simply because world population increases.
Hernando de Soto, we had a viewer by the name of Jeff Kersner who wrote in with an email asking about trickle-down theory. It says, the trickle-down approach has never worked to eliminate poverty, having only served to widen the gap between rich and poor. The end of poverty will start to come about when there is a more equitable distribution of wealth within and between all nations. What is the issue there? Why is it that there isn't, or if you agree with this, why there isn't a real trickle-down effect?
Well, the first thing is there's nothing to trickle down to. In other words, in developing countries, the people that hold the property rights, that is to say the legal instruments to own, are very few, and they include also foreign interests, and those inside the country that actually own assets but don't have the legal rights, don't have anywhere to receive anything that trickles down. So the first thing you actually need is a good system of law that protects the assets of the poor. They are under threat from two places. One, the one that Mr. Diaz mentions, which is true. There are countries and there are companies that are extremely abusive. But I'm, of course, very much concerned about the policies in developing countries themselves, where we have not given our own people the instruments with which to defend their assets under the belief that this is exclusively a Western cultural trend, and we've left them, therefore, unprotected under tribal law or poor people's laws that give them no access to credit because they have nothing to be credible about, no access to capital because they have no way to document their assets and to create the trust, and no liquidity, of course, because they can't get to the banks because they can't be identified with an address or a piece of land. Which
brings me to ask Philippe a question that came from Mohammed in Kenya. Philippe, this question came in from Mohammed in Kenya. If I could put this to you, the common denominator of developing countries' mindset is that aid from the developed world will solve the poverty equation in their respective countries. Do you believe that's the case, that developing countries essentially feel that aid is the solution?
No, that's what we make our people in the world actually believe. Because of course, what all the experts say in the film is that every time that we give one to look good, we take 100 underneath. Even when we try to cancel debt, which is of course essential, we say, okay, we'll cancel your debt, but there is always a list attached. We want access to these resources, or we want you to open your market to our product, or we want you to privatize this and that resource that you have, et cetera, et cetera. So it's clear that that's what we would want people to believe, like, aid will solve the problem, but it never did and will never do for the reason I explained, because, again, without the resources of the South, the North can't function.
Now, Hernando de Soto, I wonder, when a lot of people wonder whether or not globalization is actually helping. I mean, do you feel that it is actually a route to solving the poverty issue, or is it one that keeps those empowered and those, oppressed and perhaps under-resourced in that situation too?
No, it doesn't keep everybody that's in power alone. I mean, there are a whole bunch of new powers that have surged during globalization. China wasn't there at the beginning of globalization as we know it today, and it is there. India is getting up there, Brazil is there, my own country is growing has been growing at about 10% a year. The problem is that it's a very unequal place. I mean, globalization isn't run by anybody in particular. The important thing to understand is that globalization works for you provided that you can globalize yourself. And to globalize yourself means, first of all, that you can identify yourself within the globe. What do you do if more than 4 billion people in the world, which is where the majority of people are, don't have a property right and therefore don't have an address and therefore can't identify themselves? How can you go and raise capital if you can't say what you own or where you are? I mean, the first thing a bank asks you is your name, but the second question anybody who's going to loan to you is going to ask you is, where do you live and what do you do? And in effect, until the rules of the market, until the tools of the market are equally available to everybody, those that have them will actually prevail over the others. And relating to your previous question regarding aid, I think aid is a generous act on the part of developed countries, not always well-intentioned, but generally well-intentioned, but it is a small part of the pie. If you take a case of Egypt, to be concrete, all foreign aid given to Egypt is not even, is about 1/5 of the size of all foreign direct investment in Egypt is about 1/100th of the size of what the poor actually own today. In other words, the poor do have assets in developing countries. They do own things, but because they're owned illegally, they're not able to participate in the global game, and hence their poverty.
Well, an interesting question, Philippe, if I could put this, came to you from a viewer by the name of Linda Taylor, who says, of course poverty will come to an end. China is creating wealth in many nations and will soon be buying the bulk of Middle East oil. Africa will be the most difficult, but many people, like Bill Gates, are putting all of their money there. Now, your documentary, it takes quite a swipe at the colonial powers and how they've entrenched the developing world into a sense of debt and poverty. I wonder where China and countries that have been developing, the new sort of powers, if you like, come into the equation. There are those who feel that China is actually a new colonial power in places like Africa.
Oh, no, of course it is. There's no question about that. And what it does, it's again, I think that all this is wishful thinking, because again, if we are consuming 30% more every year than what the planet can regenerate, it means that we are in very serious trouble. And China and India coming in the playground and needing a part, of course, of these resources makes it even worse. And I don't think that, you know, the major difference between me and Mr. De Soto, which I have the most respect for, you know, is that I think that markets creates the problem, and as long as we will have this policy of what we call free market, because there's nothing free, of course, it's dictated by the powers of the North, you know, needing again these resources more desperately than ever, you know, it will never change. And of course, again, the poverty will only grow, and just because of it's a mathematical issue. It's not even anymore a political issue or an ethical issue. Is that, you know, unless the North change its policy towards consumption and waste, you know, of these resources, it will never change. It will grow worse every single year.
Well, Philippe, of course, there is that strong sense in your documentary of you know, what the colonial powers have done. And I want to get an email that came in from a viewer by the name of Jana in Palestine, in the Palestinian territories, who says, developed nations owe reparations to less developed nations for colonialism and theft of resources, slavery, imposition or propping up of despotic regimes, unethical structural readjustment programs, and other policies that have fed the development of the former while causing the underdevelopment of the latter. Is there a reverse debt here? Is there a debt owed by the colonial powers to those they've essentially exploited?
Oh, absolutely. She's absolutely right, 100%. You know, it's clear that we should always remember that our ancestor came from a very small country with almost no resources. You know, of course, UK and France has a little bit of coal, and, you know, but look at Belgium or Holland, you know, and they build these empires on the resources of the South, natural resources and human resources, of course, through slavery and all that. So absolutely, there's an incredible debt. And trust me, the problem of global warming is nothing in comparison, because we, you know, I'm not minimizing minimizing what global warming is. But with global warming, we know that people will be dying massively in the next 10, 20, or 30 years. But people have been dying massively in the past 10, 20, and more years, because of this totally unfair trade. And this, we have been stealing resources more or less for 500 years.
All right. Well, listen, I want to thank you, Philippe Diaz. Good luck with the documentary. And Hernando de Soto, great to speak with you again. Thank you for taking part in this debate.
Thank you.
Thanks. And thank you for being with us. Remember, you can follow the show on Facebook and see what we're up to there. You can give us your feedback on the programs and post your questions and comments. On the next show, Gaza 1 year on. The impoverished strip of Palestinian land remains under full lockdown 1 year after Israel's war on Gaza. And Israeli officials are starting to fear the prospect of arrest warrants for alleged war crimes. Make sure you tune in for that. From me and the team, we'll see you next time.